Every day, local government makes modern life possible. Water flows, roads are repaired, parks and playgrounds open and come to life. And behind each one of those services is a story of people who show up, care deeply, and lead with purpose, even when no one is watching. This is the HaltingWinter Podcast, and it's part of the HaltingWinter Project, a movement to restore pride, purpose, and participation in local government by sharing the stories that build belonging. I'm Seth Winterhalter, and every week I tell the stories that remind America where government really lives, locally, in our cities, our counties, and our communities. Before we hear today's conversation, I want to thank our founding sponsor, Tyler Technologies, a company that's been exclusively serving the public sector since 1998. From smarter budgeting to stronger resilience, Tyler Tech equips local governments with software and solutions that help leaders serve with clarity, efficiency, and impact. You can explore practical resources and hear the real success stories from communities across the country at tylertech.com/winter. That's tylertech.com/winter. Tyler Technologies, empowering the public sector to build stronger, more connected communities. Now, let's turn to today's conversation. My guest on the podcast today is Troy Body, City Administrator in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Man, we're back in Kentucky after a little hiatus. We were out there in September doing the Kentucky League of Cities, their annual conference. But man, I've been wanting to actually connect with you, Troy, for a while now. So this is awesome. Thanks for making the time today, and welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry I missed you when you were here with Kentucky League of Cities, but I get to talk to you now.
That's right. Well, we had a great time catching up with a variety of leaders, not only city managers, city administrators in the area, but also some elected officials. The first time we've had, mayors on, and that was fascinating, especially, Kentucky's such an interesting place in its own right. But obviously the storms, I think of Kathy Onan in Mayfield and just the tornadoes that ripped through there, and just encouraging stories of the power of local government. So I look forward to looking at what you're doing in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. But before we unpack your professional career, let's get to know you, the person. Tell us about where you were born and the childhood that shaped you and led you to where you're at today.
Well, thank you for having me on. Kentucky is, I like to say, it's a horizontal state. When you look at a map of the United States, most states seem to be vertical. We're one of those states like Tennessee and North Carolina that is a very horizontal state. So if you're looking at a map of Kentucky, I'm from the far right side, the southeast side in the mountains of Appalachia, actually, in a county called Harlan County. We've gotten a lot of press around this country, not always good, from documentaries, or most recently, if you saw the television show Justified, that's their version of Harlan County. There's a lot of country music songs and so forth about my town. It's a coal mining town. My grandfather came up from Georgia to mine coal in the mountains, and as most people came to that town, the highest mountains in Kentucky, born in Black Mountain, and I consider myself quite Appalachian. It is southern and I'm Appalachian, but I'd say I'm more Appalachian than anything, and that impacts how I look at things. It wasn't until around about the last, I'd say, and we'll get there later, when I got to Africa. I'm not by any means comparing Appalachia to Africa, but I understood more the value of money and not taking things for granted. I saw that growing up in Appalachia, and it stays with me today. One of my colleagues tells me I'm cheap, when I like to say, no, I'm frugal. I've seen people make do with just a little, and I'm not a very wasteful person. So I grew up in the hills of Harlan County, Kentucky. Went there till I was 18 years old. In that side of the state, we have independent school systems, which they're not private schools, but they have their own board and so forth, separate from the county. And I went to Harlan Independent School and graduated from there, and eventually I went off to college. My first year in college was at a private school in Kentucky called Berea, where I realized I wanted to be a journalism major. And they didn't have journalism. And the professors were telling me, well, study English and you can transition your way. But right up the road, about 45 minutes, was University of Kentucky, and they had journalism, and they had broadcast journalism, and everything I was looking for. So I actually transferred after my first year and went to UK as a sophomore to study communications, public relations, and journalism. Because at that time, that's the only job I could
Mm.
think of that that would hold my interest, and it still impacts the way I work. I don't micromanage. I don't want to be micromanaged, and I don't want a team I have to micromanage. But I'll tell you that I find myself sitting with the communications director, and I catch myself saying to her, and this is just my opinion, you do what you want to do. Here are my thoughts, because her job is a job I trained for a long time. So I did undergraduate at University of Kentucky, and my first real job, you said you noticed that wasn't on my resume. Actually, I wanted it on there. It was a resume advisor told me take it off. I got a job at ABC News in Washington, D.C. And the professor at UK held up some notice saying that CBS News in New York City was looking for what they call desk assistants and production assistants, and you're the bottom of the totem pole. So I took the information. No one else was interested in it. And I was actually more interested in ABC. So when I found out about the jobs, I called ABC to see if they had the jobs too. And they said yes. And I said, well, I want to apply. And I actually sent my resume and everything to them. I even drove up there unannounced to the bureau in Washington and just to introduce myself. And that was a risk, because it was going to make me come across as some flake trying to push myself in, or showing them I was really eager for the position. And luckily, my boss was impressed with the fact that I drove up and wanted the job so badly. And it didn't hurt that he had been a soldier at Fort Campbell in Kentucky, and he had worked at the beginning of his career at WHAS, which is a local station here in Louisville, Kentucky. And he was quite familiar with Kentucky, even though he was from Iowa. And it was a good connection. So they eventually hired me. And I ended up moving to Washington, and I was, again, coming right out of Harlan County, and you're working at ABC News, and I'm working on the shows that World News Tonight and Nightline and 2020 back then, and all those shows. I'm seeing a lot of politicians come in, and sometimes celebrities. Again, I'm at the bottom of the poll, but I'm getting to see a lot of things. And it was working in Washington, D.C., and the young people I was hanging out with, um, that they were all talking about graduate school, that, we weren't finished with our education. And I think it was them rubbing off on me that I realized, okay, I got to go get a master's degree. And I got my master's in West Virginia, honestly, because they offered the scholarship, and it was a hands-on program. So I did a master's in political science, urban, state, and local governments, with a big emphasis on cities. And it was really hands-on. They made me work the whole time and study the whole time. I was busy from morning to night. That was a 2-year program. And I'm telling you, I don't recall a break from getting up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in Huntington, West Virginia, getting with my peers, and we would drive an hour to Charleston, to the state capitol, and work at the state legislature for 8 hours, and then drive an hour back. And our classes were at night to 9. Sometimes I'm on campus to 10 or 11 o'clock. And you come home and study a little, go to sleep, and get up and do it all over again.
Mm.
So it really was 2 years of straight work. But that's where the transition hit. I got that master's in political science and a little more familiarity with government, and things changed.
Okay. Well, so many. I love this. Three things come to mind. First, let's go back to childhood. What was it that kind of led you to journalism? Was it just watching the nightly news? What was going on in the mind of Troy as you were growing up that captivated you to that?
In that little mountain town, it's such a funny question, because there was a courthouse downtown, and it had a little brick wall that was probably about 3 feet high max, if that high. And the old men in town would sit there on that wall, and they'd be old coal miners and veterans, and they had sticks of, I kid you not, cedar. And they would take a knife and they would just what do you
Or
call that?
whittling kind of.
Yeah, they're whittling. They cut little pieces of cedar. Because I can tell you, my mother once told me, tell some of those old men to give you some of that cedar because she wanted to put it in her closet. And I guess for moss. And the old men would sit there, and I had an uncle by marriage sitting there once. And as a kid, you're thinking, oh man, he's probably about 37 back then. He was old to me. And I stopped by and asked him, why are you sitting here with these old men? And just talked to him. But there was across the street, there was our local newspaper. And I would see them coming in and out. I would see Chris Jones and some of those guys. And I could see them running about, getting on different stories. And their job wasn't just, sitting at a desk. It was really being out there on the cutting edge, I thought, and it just intrigued me. Um, we didn't have internet and stuff like that. So I was a big fan, and I am today, of radio, old fashioned radio. And I would take a radio, and sometimes at night, if I twiddled around with it over the mountains, it would bounce all the way down to Atlanta. And you would have thought I was picking up radio waves from Mars or somewhere because it excited me, even just to hear traffic reports out of New York City. That just sounded so big city to me. And I'm fascinated with the radio to this day. Um, Even with the internet, I have in my kitchen in Hopkinsville, I have an internet radio, and that thing picks up about 300,000 channels. And the truth is, if you have a computer, you can pick those same stations up with that, but you'd have to know 300,000 domain names. So it lets me play around the world and listen to different radio stations. And I'm just fascinated with it. I wanted to be the kind of journalist that he was sort of my hero, really, to what Ted Koppel was doing with Nightline. I wanted to do that on radio at night in a big city.
Mm.
And that's hard to explain to you why, but there's a whole segment of the American population that's up all night. And when I would go to my grandparents or my uncles and aunts in Charlotte or Detroit, I remember I'd be allowed to stay up late and I'd listen to the radio at night, and it just fascinated me.
I love it. I love it. You're captured by the storytelling, and whether that's
Mhm.
what's funny is it's not even a fictional storytelling. It's even facts, even news, even captures you, and it captures the imagination, and yeah, different places. So that's my next question. Growing up in the environment and the culture that you did, when you move to work for, you said was it NBC or ABC?
ABC.
When you moved to do, I mean, obviously you go to University of Kentucky, there's a bigger city, but when you go to ABC, what was that like? What was the culture shock like to all of a sudden kind of be in a place that was like the places you were listening to on the radio, right? They kind of come alive in the bigness of it. What was that like?
It was about three different things. I initially ended up staying with my uncle, who was a professor up there, and his wife was a teacher. And I didn't know him very well. My mother called him and made the connection, and I stayed with him till I got my own place. But obviously, I'm in a new city, and it's a very different culture. It was working at a major network. And granted, it was just the bureau. It wasn't New York where the headquarters were, but it was a major bureau. And they had shows that came out of there, like Nightline and so forth. And seeing all of those influential, future presidents and current presidents in that bureau, and seeing the celebrity stature of some of the reporters of Brit Hume and Forrest Sawyer and Ted Koppel and Sam Donaldson and all those people, Mr. Brinkley. Um, it was very impressive. And I would watch them. I watched how they dressed. I watched how they behaved, how they spoke. I can remember watching as Mr. Koppel would do Nightline, just watch how he pronounced words, which were completely different than how we were pronouncing them in Kentucky. And I'll be honest with you, how I spoke started to change. And when I would come back to Kentucky, I remember going to a family reunion, and I have a cousin named Teresa. We call her Tisa. And she was saying, I can't understand you anymore. And I thought it was weird, but in a way I thought, good. That's great. Because some of them were mocking me, or some of them would repeat things back how I said it, and I didn't like it. Because the biggest influence on me, to be extremely honest, was the young people in that program. Um, it was a job, but it was really, I thought of it as a glorified internship, but we were paid and got benefits and you could join the credit union and everything else. But most of them got in there by their contacts. Their parents were friends with US Senator so and so, or they were coming right out of Harvard and all of this. And then you got this guy from Harlan County who just showed up on their doorsteps, and I was going to muscle my way in there because I didn't even know that job existed. Uh, and I did. And it was from my peers, learning from them. Like when we had a day off, it wasn't about, hey, let's go hang out at a bar and do all that, which we did some of that. But they would say things like, hey, let's drive down to Colonial Williamsburg, or let's go to this historic part of West Virginia. The conversations they had, the books they were talking about, and that really inspired me to go to graduate school because I thought these guys are top of the line. I thought these kids are smart and they're curious. If I had to sum them up in one word, they were just extremely curious about everything. Their discussions, everything. So the conversation immediately started of going on and finishing school, which I wasn't hadn't thought about a master's degree or anything at that point. But being around them was what made me start looking to go off to graduate school. So I then got the master's degree. I thought I'd get it in political science and then head straight back to Washington, D.C. That was always the plan. I had fallen in love with D.C. I really had. Uh, and I thought I'd be back there, but that's not what
Well, okay. We're going to unpack that. So the first thing I want to highlight for a lot of, we're getting more and more, which I love, young people listening to the podcast. And that's one of our goals, is to encourage young people to whatever you aspire to aspire to something, right? To aspire to impact, a life of impact. And that's why I think local government's so powerful, because it's such a missional, impactful work day to day. But two things I want to highlight from your story. You saw something for a different, right? What was you saw the opportunity for a different a TV station, and you asked, well, I wonder if they have it. And so you were curious. I love that you said that, curious. You were curious, and you went after and asked something. You didn't wait for it to come to you. You asked, you saw, and then you drove down. You took action to make yourself. That's a risk, right? Like you said, you could be like, oh man, are they going to interpret this wrong? You didn't get in your head. You just did it. And I just want to highlight that for young people. Stay curious, stay open-minded, and take action. Because so oftentimes that's I love this podcast and these stories. It's the actions that led to opportunity. So I love that about your story. And
absolutely. You're 100% right. When the professor announced it was CBS News, and now in thinking about it, I actually called CBS in New York and told them I had the letter that they'd sent to the school and all that. And then I interrupted her and said, do they have these same jobs at ABC? And I know in hindsight, though, that's a dumb thing to do. But she said yes. And then I said, do you think they have them in Washington? And she said, well, I'm pretty sure. And it was there I looked up ABC News in Washington and called them. And I think I was thinking, well, this is a low-level, entry-level job. New York is terribly expensive. DC would be more manageable and so forth. So I called them up. They did have the job. And what also helped me there was having really good friends to support me, because I had a couple of buddies. I said, will you go up to DC with me? And they were like, let's do it. And what's even cooler is right across from ABC News is a Grand Hotel. And I can't think of the name. It's an old historic Grand Hotel, and it's terribly expensive. And here we are, broke kids just getting out of college. But I went into the hotel and I told the manager there what we were doing. He was at the desk and he said, if you don't mind, up on the top floor, we're doing construction and the floor is ripped up, but I can give you guys a room for, I think it was like, he gave it to us for $100 and we split it $33 a piece. And so I'm staying at this fancy upscale hotel, but I'm actually staying on the construction floor, and it's directly across from the bureau. So I was able to just walk over there. It really just, the stars aligned, it worked out. And now that I'm thinking about it, thank goodness I had the friends also that said, yeah, we'll go with you. that kind of support, because I don't know if I'd have done it right then by myself, but with them, and we didn't overthink it. We jumped in the car and we took off and drove from Kentucky through, West Virginia, Virginia, and on up to DC, and we just did
I
it.
love it. It's so awesome. But again, it's taking action. It's not getting in your head and outthinking yourself and just doing. So you're at
Hmm.
Marshall University and you think, I love this. You think I'm going to get this political science degree. I'm going to go back to DC and boom, you already kind of have it in your head. But the local government bug bites you. What was that like? What was it that bit you there? And kind of again, your story, you don't jump right into local government work, but what was it about local government during that program that kind of bit you, that opened your eyes to the opportunity?
And actually, they had me working more in state government because I was at the state legislature, but we did do some work with local government and also work with federal officials. My professors were fantastic. I mean, they all had degrees and all that, but they all had experience too of working in government. And so it was a balance of not just looking at it from an academic standpoint. They had real life experience and appointed positions and so forth, and they advised government officials. So I got to do hands-on stuff, working at state legislature, researching and having to put together legislation that was going to become a bill is interesting. It was exciting. I After it was done, after the 2 years were up, I have to tell you that they kind of went by very fast, but it was really working from morning until night. And then it was over. I raised my head up and I thought, okay, what now? Now I've got to break my way back into Washington, D.C. But I didn't do that. Um, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. A buddy of mine from college called and said, well, before you go back to DC, why don't you come overseas? And I said, why? He was in South Korea and he was teaching at university there and teaching English and stuff. And he said, let me connect you with the company that brought me over here. He's like, they take care of everything. You should really take a break and do that. And I thought, I don't know about that. I'm headed back to DC. But I actually did talk with the company. And a couple months later, I'm on an airplane. Um, they mailed my master's degree to my mother's house. I'm on an airplane headed to Seoul, South Korea to teach English.
Wow. This is so interesting because I just had Jamie Gwynn on, who's in Pennsylvania, I believe, and he mentioned the same thing. Just this random encounter that took him over to Asia as well to teach. And so, what was that? Again, I love this. Again, Appalachia, kind of a very unique environment. You go to DC, talk about a culture change. Now you're going to go half around the world. What was that culture change like?
And I'm telling you, when I landed in that city, and I couldn't read Korean at that time, it was probably at that time, the largest city I'd ever been into. And I landed in the middle of the night and they met me. There was a guy there named Mr. Lee, and he took me to this little hotel and just dropped me off and said, we'll pick you up tomorrow and everything will be fine. Cause I was overwhelmed and I was tired. I believe it was a 17-hour flight. I was exhausted. So you're landing in this vast city. Seoul was so growing so rapidly, and it was overwhelming. Everything, just the crowdedness of it, and so forth. You're in a city that is, I'm thinking two and a half, three times larger than my whole state, population wise. Um, so it was overwhelming, but it was also, and it was scary and it was exhilarating. It was one of the best things. I can't even tell you how great this is. I got lost in that city. They had dropped me off at the hotel. They were going to pick me back up really that Monday. And I'm sure they had me on a Saturday. I got lost in an alleyway and I couldn't read Korean at that time. So I kept going back and up and down these alleyways looking for my hotel. I couldn't find
Mm.
it. And what I would learn later is I didn't go down the street far enough. So I ran into a bunch of foreigners that were about my age from Canada and Europe and Australia. And they're like, look, guy, we don't know what hotel you're in. There's about 25,000 of them just in this area. So what you're going to do is stay in our hotel And then we'll go over to that school where you're going to be working, and they'll work it. We'll go over there tomorrow and they'll work it out. So I ended up staying in that hotel, and I met from that incident folks who will become some of my best friends to this day.
Mm.
So it worked out. What was terrifying and scary, and also made me feel a little dumb, quite frankly, that couldn't find my hotel. Um, I met some great people, and I have to say, to this day, living in Seoul, South Korea has probably been the happiest time of my
Mm.
life.
What again? What a powerful moment there. Again, like you say, loss. I can't imagine being in a city like you say that size, that scope. You feel alone. To feel alone in the
Mhm.
middle of millions of people, and yet you feel like you're the only person really on earth in that situation. And then, like you say, to randomly run into people that become your friends. What a powerful time and a moment. How long were you there, and what was the what was after this?
It was roughly 3 years, and I would meet them, and they were so great and supportive, and hanging out with them. Now, I will tell you, I can remember my last month in Korea, and they had a big birthday slash goodbye party for me. And they were mocking me and rubbing my face in that, being lost and making fun of me and everything. And it's one of the best things that ever happened to me. And so I will tell you, if you do have those young people listening, um, yeah, taking that chance, and it does work out. And you never know where you're going to find your joy, because you asked me what was next. I came back to Kentucky, and I started looking for a job because the economy in South Korea was starting to crash. I mean, just crash at that time, and the U.S. was doing quite well. I came back and I reached back out to the governor's office in West Virginia because I had interned up there and made myself known. So instead of heading back to DC, now I'm headed back to West Virginia. And the governor's office, including the governor, gave me an appointment. And so I would end up staying in West Virginia about 6.5 years after that. So I ended up going back to West Virginia, but this time I'm in Charleston, in the capital of West Virginia, and I worked there. The governor appointed me in the Cabinet of Education and the Arts, and I would eventually work my way up from a public information officer to one of the agencies in that division. There was called Division of Culture and History. It was over all the museums, all the arts, all the archives, historic preservation, etc., and the State Theater and all these things. And I became the commissioner, um, and was appointed there. And I worked under three different governors. And eventually, Governor Fletcher won in Kentucky, and they brought me back home to my home state, where I became press secretary for the governor and his director of minority affairs. He threw me in that because the person left. I think he didn't want to bother with filming it, so he put that under me too, and I stayed there with him. Now, unfortunately, he did not win re-election. So I was like, wow. I left West Virginia and came down here, and we didn't get a second term. But unfortunately, New Orleans had flooded, and they were working on the rebuilding efforts. And this is how connections work. And you never know. You just never know who that person is that's going to be that connection for you. So being kind to everybody, it really pays off. There was a woman there in West Virginia. She lived in West Virginia, but she also lived in New Orleans. Her name was Bobby, and she worked in the arts. So she was on the Arts Council, which was under me in West Virginia. But in New Orleans, she and a partner had started it's a architectural firm and planning agency, and they were helping to rebuild New Orleans and lay out a master plan for the city. And she kept trying to bring me down there and bring me down there. And honestly, I love New Orleans, but I wasn't a city planner or any of that. And she kept trying to get me to work for her, but they had brought in a recovery czar at the city, Dr. Blakely, who was from California, but he was a professor in Australia. And the mayor had brought him in, and she said, well, come meet Dr. Blakely. And I came down and met with him and the team he was putting together. So after we didn't win re-election in Kentucky, now I'm in New Orleans on the recovery team. It's about 18 of us that were brought in from around the country, and a few from Australia. And we're pulling down all the information from the feds, getting all the everything in order and starting to pull down the money for the city to start rebuilding itself, working with FEMA and HUD primarily, but all the cabinets in the federal government and working with the city. So we were quasi city employees, but the city didn't pay me. I was paid by the feds, but the money came through the mayor's office. So I was listed as working for the mayor.
You know, we're living through one of the biggest shifts local government has ever seen. Not political, not cultural, it's digital. AI, automation, cybersecurity, cloud migration, none of this used to be part of your job description. But now it's the choppy water every city and county is swimming in. And for many leaders, it feels less like innovation and more like what's going to break next, and will we survive it? Here's the truth most people won't say out loud. A lot of governments aren't afraid of the cloud. They're afraid of getting it wrong. Because the stakes are real. You're trying to protect data, modernize ancient systems, improve service, and keep your residents happy, all while staying under budget and out of the fire. That's why I appreciate the team at Tyler Technologies. They don't talk about the cloud like it's magic pixie dust. They break it down. What to migrate, when to migrate, how to get long-term value without blowing your budget or burning out your people. They've helped more local governments make this transition than anyone I know, and they've put all their best insights into a new ebook about cloud adoption and strategy. If you're trying to lead your organization into the future instead of getting dragged there, you got to check this out. Their newest guide is called Modern Governments Live in the Cloud, and you can download it for free at tylertech.com/winter. That's tylertech.com/winter, WINTER. tylertech.com/winter. Go check it out. Download the free guide. Now, back to the conversation. It's so fascinating. I think if we just had Kevin Robinson, I think actually his episode will release the same week as yours, Spencer, Iowa, and he talks about the flooding there. And people just don't understand. Again, we've had, Kentucky, Kathy Onan and Mayfield and et cetera. People don't understand that when something tragic happens like that, yes, you get national attention. Obviously, the flooding in New Orleans was national attention. But it takes, the recovery process is years, if not even there. I wonder, even what the process continues to be like there. I mean, these are huge problems of redevelopment, of all the things that go into infrastructure, et cetera. And so, so you go down there to be a part of this revitalization team. What was that like? What was it like to go in and then have to be a part of something that no longer is national news, no longer is getting attention? I'm sure the recovery process is also difficult because, again, you don't have national attention. You have, it's not the news of the hour anymore. And now you have to do the hard work of working together, all the components of local government, state government, trying to rebuild a place. What was that like?
Firstly, it was overwhelming to the government itself, the federal and the state and the local. And because we hadn't had a recorded disaster like that. And just the books they were dropping on us, 4 inches thick, of all this information and how to pull down this money. And I think in the American people's mind and in some of the people's mind in New Orleans, the money was in the bank. It was not. It was allocated at the federal level. Then we had to pull it down from the Fed, from the respective agency, to the state. Then they had to appoint it. Then we pull it down to the city council. And it was a long, arduous process. They bring in HUD and FEMA about every 6 months to do these audits. And they were very direct with us. They were like, you don't fail these audits. This is not some regular audit. These are the kind of audits, because of the money we were dealing with, the amount, the billions, that you fail these audits, you'll be in penitentiary. And that was literally said to us at one point. It was the matter of just pulling it down, how long it was and how arduous it was and complicated. And even the feds were changing things, and they have great intentions where we're going to put money here. Then we'd realize, well, that's not a good idea. Let me give you an example. Millions and millions of dollars allocated just for grass cutting. And when you're in a climate like New Orleans, where it's 75 degrees on Christmas Day and it rains every day for 5 to 15 minutes, the grass is always growing. So you'll find yourself having spent millions of dollars cutting grass, and then the next week, it looks like you haven't done anything. So one of the things my boss was saying is this is a waste of money. And it's just not. So he would tell the mayor and the state legislature and the feds there are better things to do with this money. So we were always changing because we were learning. Also, it took me a while to realize because I'm in there trying to push, push, push. My staff from New Orleans, they were rebuilding too. So not only were we rebuilding the city for everyone, when they got off work, they had to go rebuild their home. They had to rebuild their mother's home, their church, their community center. And I had to remind myself that they were going through all this too. And that was the hardest thing. And that's where I really, man, I fell in love with the power of code enforcement and public works. Because make no mistake about it, and I love fire, I love police, I love all the other people that were helping FEMA and everything. But it was code enforcement and public works, in my opinion, that rebuilt New Orleans and the work that was on them. They were the star of every city council meeting because they were the ones they as soon as we walked in, they were waiting for us, for good or for ill. And I must tell you, it's every other day we're finding dead bodies. We're finding people out in the fields. We're finding they have this thing in New Orleans where they go up in the attics and they put hatchets and saws and stuff up there. So if a flood like that comes, if you have to, you can saw through and go up on the roof. And that's why you saw, if you go back and remember the footage from CNN, people sitting on their roofs, they were climbing through those holes that they chopped. Well, some people didn't make it. So you're finding bodies up in the attics. It was a tense time. It was an overwhelming time. It was strenuous, but it was the most rewarding work I've done. Um, People would stop you in the supermarket, either praise you or yell at you. They tap me on the shoulder at the movie theater and go, "Hey, you guys said you'll be paving this," in the middle of a movie. We had, I remember some people on a street, I believe it was Carrollton, talking about their restaurants and could we get those roads fixed because we weren't just fixing roads, we were fixing the pumps that were under the roads to pump the water so that hopefully doesn't happen again. And I remember going to Robert, I want to say his name is Mendoza. He was the guy in charge of the money for the roads. And I didn't know him very well, but I told him about these people in Carrollton and the restaurant owners and how could we start the work on the roads over there. Well, he did. And I was like, well, that's nice. I felt, okay, I've had some influence there. I can remember sitting in city council, some of those restaurant owners coming to council, yelling and screaming about the tearing up of their roads and how it's hurting their business and how angry they were. And I'm sitting there with my mouth open going, are you freaking kidding? You stopped me and told me, start there. It will help you. Let's let you be first. And I went and asked, could we do that? And they did it. And now they're at city council complaining. So you learn right then that's a metaphor sometimes for local government. That is like you, as they used to tell me in church growing up, sometimes you can't win for losing. And man, I learned a lot there. So you just do what's right and keep going and don't worry about it.
So good. I love that. The idea, yeah, of well, two things you said. Public works first, just I'm gonna ring that bell because people don't understand really what local government does. We expect and are entitled to the modern services that we get, sewer, water, streets, etc. But we don't understand, like I was down in the LA fires a year ago. Right after that, I spoke for the League of California Cities Public Works Conference they did. And I just said, public works is they're first responders too. They're managing
Absolutely.
streets, they're managing the traffic lights, et cetera, all these things, the infrastructure. But then they're the people who have to put it back together. The fire gets to go back and kind of be the heroes of the moment, right? And it's the public works who have to, are responsible for then that infrastructure being built back together. And so, yeah, I love just waving the flag of public works. You guys are awesome. Thank you for what you do.
They're out there clearing the roads when big storms are coming for those ambulance and police and firefighters and sanitation and everybody to get through. Or on the other note, when we're having major events, in downtown, they're the ones setting up that stage and setting up everything. And what a lot of people will forget is when the concerts are over and you're headed home, well, at 11 and 12 o'clock at night, Public Works is still downtown breaking everything down and cleaning up the streets. And, it doesn't happen over by itself. These are the guys that are unseen. So often the mayor and I in Hopkinsville will send breakfast to Public Works. And I've written a couple of articles and done podcasts about them because in Hopkinsville, like so many American communities, they're very generous with fire and police. They'll send breakfast and donuts and things, but Public Works is often forgotten. And so we'll encourage people to send things to them. In fact, a few months ago, I asked the police chief and the fire chief to send breakfast over to Public Works. I could have done it, but I wanted it to come from them. I wanted the Public Works guys to see it coming from fire and police. And the mayor and I do it about 3 times a year. We'll go over and take breakfast to them because they're often unseen. And, they don't really have the uniforms like you see in fire and police. So they don't have a badge. So they're not as
Yeah.
visible.
Oh, so you spend a couple years in New Orleans doing this, and then you take another. I just love your story. It's just all over the place. We're gonna head over to Nigeria. Tell us about this. How'd you get there? How did this happen?
Well, actually, there was a friend of mine working for a company called the National Democrat Institute, and I hadn't heard from Pat. Well, he'd worked with me in West Virginia at the state capitol, uh, and I hadn't heard from him in a while. And he said, "I transitioned. I'm over in where was he? Bosnia or somewhere." And I was like, "Okay, that's not every day." And he had told me, he's like, "We need folks like you with, your background similar to mine doing this kind of work." So there was a company, and they're still there, International IRI, International Republican Institute, and they were all around the world. And they talked to me about joining their Africa division to go to what was going to become South Sudan. Sudan, the Sudan was the largest geographically country in Africa, but it was going to split. And you're going to have the Sudan up north and what they would call South Sudan down south, obviously. And would we go and work with the South Sudanese government and political parties and government offices, city, county, everything basic, and do basic setup. Help them do the most basic rudimentary things that are taken for granted in a country like ours. So we went there before the country broke up. We were there once the split happened, and we worked with the ruling political party and the minor opposition parties to help them set up government on the national level and the state level and the county level and the city level, every level. So that's the work we were doing. And I was in South Sudan for about a year and a half or two. And then the company moved me to, they were always moving us. So we'd work in Kenya. Then they had me down in Zimbabwe, where we had offices in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. And then after all that, they moved me to Nigeria. So I was in East Africa, Southern Africa, and then West Africa.
Wow. What was that like? How fascinating to be a part of the beginning of something from the country, a new country. I get well, that'd be a country, right? I mean, South Sudan, country to state to local to county to city. What was that like building the infrastructure of a place?
You felt so useful because a country like South Sudan, which I would argue is the poorest country in the world, you felt I would write home to my friends and say, any skill set is needed. And I mean, not just from government practitioners to nurses to school teachers to, okay, a perfect example. We learned it'd be real easy to get very wealthy people in America and Europe to donate money for a hospital to build the actual building. The trick is getting the supplies. And the trick is getting the staff, not just doctors and nurses. In the United States, you can throw a rock and hit a phlebotomist. Somebody knows how to use a needle. Well, not everybody in a country like that does. And having the trained nurses and the people who do the technology in hospitals and all the things that are in hospital that people like you and I don't think about is the same in many ways what you were touching on we have in city government that people don't think about. All these positions and the things we do, they don't just happen. And we the need in South Sudan was so great. You felt so needed and so appreciated. the skill sets that we were providing that were being taken for granted, that we take for granted. So it was a lot of work. It was hard because I was living on a camp. My shower water often looked like coffee. It was brown. And, sometimes the food was very dodgy and questionable. And I know it sounds like I'm whining. You had 2 seasons, that 10 months of heat, the dry season, and then you'd have the rainy season, which was about 2 months. And when the water comes, you're very thankful for it, but with it comes mosquitoes, and with them comes malaria and everything else. So it was hot, it was dry, it was poor, but it was also very gratifying. It was intense. You still had war going on and tribal feuds all around you. You saw real starvation. You saw true poverty. So every time I would come back to the US or anywhere in the developed world, but especially in the US, just coming to Louisville and going walking in Cherokee Park, every time, and to this day, when I go to that park, I'm giving gratitude. Just so thankful to have community assets. Or the first thing I would do when I got off the plane and land in Louisville and go into my condo is you could take a shower and the water would get in your eye, in your ear, or in your mouth, and you didn't freak out. You know, you think I'm not going to get typhoid or something. And it was clear. And I'm a tap water drinker. I'm sorry. Where I've lived, I I I don't care. Anywhere in this country, I drink tap water. I don't want to hear it. I just don't. Um, I'm so thankful. So I've learned the gratitude, but I also took that Appalachian sensibility. I There's a lot of waste in foreign affairs. There's a lot of waste, not just with U.S. government money, but I saw it with European money because we got European grants and stuff too, and I treated their tax dollars the same as I treated yours. I watched it, but then there are a lot of people that was working around me, some Americans, some from other countries, and they would treat American money like you could just throw it literally on trees, and that would bother me. I watched every dime, and I was working around with people who did not. So there was those kind of things that bothered me. But some of the work I thought that I saw done in international affairs, I thought, "Mm-mm, it's not necessary. This is frivolous." But then I thought there's true work we could do. Like my farmers in Western Kentucky could go to various parts of Africa and teach them things that would last generations and generations, or the healthcare, or there are very certain skill sets that we have that we could take to certain countries like that, and they are life changing. Then there was certain work being done over there was completely, this is my opinion, absolutely unnecessary.
What a journey, and talk about having your eyes opened but also living a life of impact. Again, you're seeing this, you're building this. It's so, man, it's so cool. What is the step after this? I have a Democracy International. Tell us what are the next
So I came home and I was like, okay, I'm tired. I wasn't home but a few months, and then Democracy, after leaving IRI, International Republican Institute, Democracy International had won the grant back in South Sudan, and it was a large grant from the U.S. government, $60 million, and they were saying that the government spoke very highly of you, and people spoke highly. Would you go back over for us? And I thought, I'm liking this clean water and stuff. I'm getting comfortable with food that I can trust and all that kind of stuff. And my bed and things like that, air conditioning and stuff. So they threw money at me. I'm not going to lie to you. And um, I thought I was going to go back just for a few months, which I did. Then they asked me would I stay permanently. So I ended up going back for a little longer than I thought I would. Actually, I was back in the same camp where I was initially, just with a different program. And they had won the grant from the US government. And we were doing similar work, but also building up nonprofits and all the other agencies that work in communities, helping them, what they call civil society, helping them get set up too. And I was made chief of party, which is sort of like the executive director of the program. So I went back and stayed a little while. I stayed until the war broke out and we had to literally
mm,
escape. Um, we kept telling them in Washington, listen, people are leaving the camp. All these international programs are going away. because things are getting bad here. Oh, no, you guys can stay. It'll be fine. It wasn't fine. We were locked down on camp for a few days. And eventually, have to tell you, I had some money stored from the program, and we hired a guy out of Nairobi. We told him, what was the deal? Are you prepared to fly into this country, even though the airport's closed, and get us and fly us back out of here? And we told him it was extremely risky because the president had closed the airport, but he gave us a price, and I had the money cash, and I loaded my staff on that airplane, and we flew out of that country
What an experience that is. I mean,
for 13,000 US
wow.
dollars. And uh, I took the rest of the money and put it in a hotel safe at a five-star hotel in Nairobi. I called the manager and I told him, and I'll just be very blunt with your audience. I told him I don't want any bullshit. I'm going to put like 40 something thousand dollars in US dollars in this safe. I don't want to be told in the morning that you were robbed. I don't want to hear about any bandits. That was his word. I don't want to hear any foolishness. I just told him that money better be here in the morning. The staff was on per diem. So I said, don't let them charge anything to the room. Send me a bottle of champagne up. I'm going to take a shower. And that's what I did.
What a crazy experience. Oh,
It was later, it would be two bottles of champagne.
I bet.
I had been laying on the floor, man, listening to gunshot and all that. So when we got to Nairobi, I just could exhale. My team was safe. We let them know in America. And all I could do was go take a
Yeah.
shower. Just go take a hot shower. I didn't care if it was champagne. I wouldn't have cared, honestly, if it was a Diet Coke, but that's what he sent up. So
Well, again, it's not just, I mean, this is like a movie. It's not just you and your safety, it's your team. You feel responsible.
that
You feel it's like and how frustrating. We'll just dive in here for a moment because it's so fascinating. How frustrating, again, you're halfway across the world and the people that are back in America, you're telling them, like, hey, this is not good. We need, oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. It's kind of how it is, right? Sometimes the upper echelon who doesn't really know is just making decisions. You're like, man, I'm on the ground. I got bullets flying overhead. What was that like going through your head, not just for your own safety, but for the teams and trying to figure out, like, you're trying to execute right plans to figure out how do we stay safe? What was that like going through your mind in that moment?
Well, the staff had started coming asking for time off. So I had international staff and local staff, and we had about 60 local staff, and we were in 10 states there, and they're all asking for time off and all this. And first I didn't pay it any attention, but then it's like, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? So when we sat down, they were all like, war's going to break out. They wanted to get their family members out to neighboring countries like Uganda, where they'd be safe. And so once I realized what was going on, we worked with them, all that wanted to leave, to get them and their families out. So we're living on a camp, and all the foreigners on my camp, they're all at different organizations. They're leaving. They're going to Uganda. They're going to Kenya. They're going to Europe. They're going wherever, but they're getting out of South Sudan. And so we keep calling back to base, to Washington. And it's, oh, we think this is just hype. We've got our own intel, and we think this is hype. And I realize now I'm like some of the last on camp, me and my team. And I'm explaining to them in Washington, I don't think you understand. We are having trouble now getting food and water and things on this camp. There are no supplies. Roads are closed. The airport's closed. This internet may not hold up. So after a while, I just said, "Now that's enough." I talked to my security guys. I talked to the team. I had been saving money, US dollars, in the safe. We had about 60,000 or so in there. And I said, we're getting out of here. So we were going to, and it goes when I spoke to the Hopkinsville leadership class where I was explaining nobody is coming to save Hopkinsville. We got to save it ourselves. Nobody is coming to save your community, not the feds, not some foreign company. You have to take care of yourself. And that's what I told our team. We took the local currency, the South Sudanese currency, and any of the staff that needed it to take care of their family locally, we were handing it out. And then the US dollars, I took them and sat with my security guys and our team, and we made a plan to get ourselves out of that country. Um, when I think back on the company, if you want to give them in Washington, if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they really thought things would get better and we were overreacting, because it had happened before where we'd heard intel that war was going to break out and then it didn't. But I don't think you take that risk. Okay, you can give them the benefit of the doubt, but to me, it was, as you know, when you're dealing with federal money, you get 20% of that administrative cost. And if I'm not in South Sudan and I'm not spending the grant money, then they're not getting paid in
Mm.
Washington. And that's how I felt it was about. It was just money and it was a financial decision. And so at one point, I decided enough. This is my life. This is my team's life. We're out of here. So we did whatever needed to be done, and I'll let you fill in the blanks there, to get to that airport, even though the roads and all that stuff were closed down and blocked off, and to get inside the airport and to get on that runway. And that plane came in from the east, and we got on it. He wanted to run and tell the man in the tower and all that stuff. We're like, no, no, you're not doing that. You're not. You're going to turn this damn plane around and you're going to get up out of this country. And that's what we
Oh
did.
my goodness. I can imagine going through an experience like that again shapes I'm sure you're in some city council meetings now in Hopkinsville that can get heated, that can get a little dramatic. I don't think nothing probably rattles you now being after that situation.
It's it's funny you say that stuff. I mean, because you do. You just sit there and go, okay, I'll live through this, and your skin gets tougher, and you because the staff in Washington, when we would do our weekly calls and reports, there was one guy, and I really liked him back in DC. And I would say to Jeb after the end of each call, nobody died. And you put everything in perspective. Nobody died. So, yeah, we're having trouble on this side of the country with this office we're trying to open or this or that, but the team's still safe. Everybody's alive. Whatever the trouble is, we'll get through it. And that's how I look at things sometimes from that perspective of, look, okay, it didn't go the way we planned, but we're all still alive. Nobody died. We'll be okay. And maybe I get it sometimes when certain people don't want that approach, but it is the
Yeah.
truth. We get sometimes worked up over small things. Okay. For example, we just opened a new firehouse, firehouse number 5 in Hopkinsville. We believe it's the largest in Kentucky. It's 38,000 square feet. The mayor wanted to cut the ribbon in October. It wasn't ready. And the team, I was going down there every week, checking on the progress, and I met with the team and I said, I'll just go tell them. And we sat down and said, it's not ready. And I explained, it's not going to be ready. So, and I'm not going to rush it. We're going to open it when it's right, when it's perfect, when it's my goal with that firehouse was I wanted the firefighters to be the most proud of it. That was the goal. I wanted the guys that were going to work out of it to be the most proud of it. I want them to brag about working there. And it is a little over the top, to be honest. But they're proud of it. And that was the goal. And just had to sit down and tell the mayor, I know you thought you're going to do that ribbon cutting and there's this big, massive event. It ain't going to happen. It'll happen before Thanksgiving. And even then, we did it and it wasn't 100% ready. The tower out back, the burn tower, is being constructed as we speak. It wasn't 100% ready. But in my mind, look, we're all alive. Life is good. We cut the ribbon. Let's go on. I'm not going to stress over it, man. I'm not going to stress over those things that I cannot control. And it'll be all right because in a few weeks, the burn tower will be done. The firehouse will be completely finished, slightly under budget. And that's that. And you go on.
Love it. Yeah. Well, speaking of Hopkinsville, that's the next stop on the journey. Now we're actually going to come into local government in a official city administrator capacity. For those who don't know, Hopkinsville, what is that? About an hour, a little more than an hour north of what is that? West of Nashville.
Nashville, about 55 miles, and it can be a 55-minute drive, or it can be one time 4.5 hours. It depends on that traffic. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the country. The mayor down there told us, the previous mayor told us there's 100 people a day moving there. The skyline is not the same skyline that I saw when I first moved to that side of the state. Nashville probably has about 80 or 90 cranes in the sky as we speak. It is rapidly growing. And we are just north of that and trying to capitalize on that growth. Clarksville, Tennessee is the most northern city in Tennessee. It's on the border there of Kentucky. And that Mayor Pitt told us he could use 12 to 18 new 100 houses a month. And I asked him who his largest employer was, and he said it's the city of Nashville. His people come there and they live in Clarksville, but they work in Nashville and do that little 25, 30-minute drive. So with that growth, we across the state line in Kentucky there, especially up in Hopkinsville, we're trying to capitalize on some of that growth and some of the growth in the region. We're also next door to Fort Campbell, which I believe is America's fourth largest military installation. Very active installation, very popular. And the city government, we do work for Fort Campbell too. They have these IGSA programs called IGSA, which is an intergovernmental service agreement where we stripe the roads. We do various things. They wanted us to do various contracts for them where city government can do it cost-wise more effective than the military. And so they turn over certain things. And they do this across the country, and I believe outside of the country too. So we do work for the Fort Campbell as well. And our city's about 32,000. So you do have me coming from Africa, taking a break, and then pivoting to Hopkinsville. And I must tell you, before we jump from Louisville to Hopkinsville, it was no easy thing with my resume having international affairs on it in Kentucky. I think if it had been New York, LA, Chicago, or even especially Washington, D.C., wouldn't have been looked at twice. I really think it was looked at as an impediment, having that foreign work, even though I was working for I was working for an NGO, a non-governmental organization, but it was being completely funded by the federal government, and I'm following all of those rules and regulations. It was no easy pivot. So the city of Hopkinsville, the mayor at that time, he said, no, I see it as an asset. We're going to take a chance on you. And so that's how I ended up. There were about 2 or 3 positions open in Kentucky. Paducah, my friend Darren, who you talked to, he wasn't in that position at the time. There was a guy named Jim Arndt. He had just started in Paducah, and I started in Hopkinsville, and there was another position open somewhere else. So they took a chance, and it was a learning, I had a learning curve. How local government is different from feds and state and definitely international. We deliver every day, and we're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We don't close, and we deliver every single day, every moment of the day. And you transition, you pivot, you have to do the daily deliveries, and at the exact same time, you have to do the long-term planning. Whereas in federal government, you have guys that are doing one thing, and then they've got whole teams that do policy and planning and long-term stuff. On the local levels, we do all that ourselves. And that's where it's very different. You have to deliver. You're always on. You're never off. And it's a metamorphosis. You transform to do this type of work.
Man, so many good things there. I want to let's dive into the weeds of what you just said, because that's one of the reasons of this podcast is shining the light on local government and reminding people that, in some of the other positions you had, it's the federal government, you're looking for grants, and again, local government does that, but local government is still responsible every day to take, I always say people complain about paying taxes for the local government, but you have no idea the cost to make sure you have all the services you take for granted. The infrastructure of water, the infrastructure of sewer, the infrastructure of trash, the infrastructure of having emergency response, we complain if they're not there in 3 minutes flat. Go to Africa and see how long it takes you to get emergency response if they even have it, And so the things that we take for granted, again, are on your plate to provide. Like you say, a city doesn't shut off. It's 24/7. So my question is, and I asked this of everyone who's on the podcast, stepping now into that position out of all the things you've had, again, you're not on a tarmac trying to flee for your life, so you have some perspective, and yet it doesn't shut off. The work is always there, and kind of like what you said in that experience in New Orleans, where you listened to people, you tried to act on their behalf of what they said, and when you did it, they came back and crapped on you for it, right? They complained about it. You get that every day in local government, where you're trying to provide those services and someone always has a complaint. The same time people show up and moan about stuff. How do you, because you've been now in Hopkinsville since 2018, that's a good tenure, a good run. How do you do, I talk about work-life balance. I say balance is BS. There's no such thing as balance. There's just intention. How do we be intentional about our personal life, our professional life, our relational life? What have you learned now in that position, your first time as a city administrator in that unique role? How do you take care of Troy so Troy's able to stay effective, to stay intentional, to stay impactful? How do you do it?
Thank you for that question, because I was literally talking to a friend in West Virginia. She's in a very stressful job. And I was telling her, I said, you've got to step back. And it's that every one of us has been on an airplane. They tell us that oxygen mask, when it drops, you've got to look at yourself. You've got to put it on. And I know if you're a parent, you got 3 or 4 little kids, it's okay to say, no, my children always come first. Well, if you don't put your mask on first and you pass out for a lack of oxygen, you're utterly no good to your children. And it's the same when you're working in city government or any stressful job. You've got to take care of yourself, or you're no good to the team. You're no good to the city. And what was okay in South Sudan, or what was okay in New Orleans or West Virginia, or in Frankfurt at the Kentucky Governor's Mansion, it's all been different. I found myself, I've always gone to the gym, but I find in Hopkinsville, I go walking. Um, and it's so helpful in terms of listening to podcasts, sometimes music, but mostly audio books and podcasts. Another thing, and this is a personal thing, no alcohol. I quit drinking. And that that was a deliberate step, but just for clarity and being on call 24 hours a day and so forth, it is no judgment with anyone else. It was just like, that's not a good thing for me. Not here, not in this situation. So it was taking care of myself, having that clarity, um, trying to be as strong as I physically can, mentally, physically, spiritually, or else I won't survive the job, because I can see I can just see things changing since I've been there. Where we used to have these tornadoes touch down once every 3 years, well, now they're touching down twice a year, and they don't come alone. They're touching down with a flood, and they're hitting us. We're getting 14, 18 inches of rain in a matter of hours, and then there's a tornado on top of it, which is just Mother Nature mocking us. In Hopkinsville, you've got armadillos walking around, and I'm like, what? Uh, what are these doing in my state, on this side of the Mississippi? Because the climate is changing, and it doesn't matter your political thoughts on it. The new salt house we built, and you fill that thing up with salt, and I'm going, yeah, we don't use that salt. We also order salt for Fort Campbell, the military installation. It was a year or two ago. They said, don't even order it for us. We'll tell you when we want some, because they're not using it. That we're seeing the climate change, and it's changing how we do things. And to just always be on call, to just be the strongest, and to be my best, I had to make some adjustments in terms of diet, in terms of physical health, and in terms of faith, in terms of reading, to what works for me, and whatever works for you. Um, if that's binge watching Game of Thrones, been there, done that. If that's reading, if that's volunteering, or if you've got kids or a dog or a cat, whatever works for you, you got to be true to yourself and find it and embrace it. Because that work life balance, I don't know if it's a real thing or not. It's a matter of, honestly, it's survival. It's like, how do you survive? In South Sudan, we had that camp, and I lived in a dorm room. And I actually asked the camp manager, my favorite color is green. And I know this sounds weird, but having green walls is very soothing to me. having lots of reading materials and all these kind of things. So in that dorm room, I had them paint the whole thing green. They even brought me a small little sofa, looked like a dormitory sofa. I had a million reading materials and my internet radio I told you about. I had that brought over with me. Um, it's how I could cope being in that country, in the third world, as we used to call it, away from family, because you're away for all the weddings, you're away for all the birthdays, your funerals, graduations, your little nieces and nephews growing up, and you got to reintroduce yourself to them. Streaming a family reunion once and feeling, awful. Um, you've got to learn to adjust. I don't know if there's a such thing as a balance. It's how do you survive it and come out on the other end? You want to come out at least as strong as you did when you went in. And for me, it was changing my diet, changing. I live in Kentucky. We're not embarrassed about bourbon, but I had to say, okay, not for me, not right now. I read a lot. I engage with family and friends a lot. It is whatever would get me gassed back up to get back in the office and be my absolute strongest. I don't want to just get through the day. I don't believe the city of Hopkinsville hired me for that. When they put you in charge of a city, they're handing you a baby, man. They're handing you this baby. It's their baby, and they want it back. They want it back healthier, stronger, happier. They want it damn sure better than they gave it to you, and that's the way. It's a living, breathing organism. And coming from Eastern Kentucky, I can tell you towns die. All those that little town that my mother was born in called Llewellyn, which was a glorified coal camp, you couldn't find it right now if I paid you to go find it. I do think there's a rail marker where the train rolled through to get the coal. That may be still there. There is no semblance of that town anymore. Towns die, and they're living, breathing organisms, and we have to approach them like that.
So good.
And they're
Oh man, this is so many things. Okay, I want to be mindful of time. Two things I want to highlight. You just said, I think the key, there is no such thing as work-life balance. It is a myth. There is just how do you thrive in the tension, right, of life, especially in leadership. That's what my biggest keynote is on. And I think you said it. It's self-awareness. But it's self-awareness on an ongoing basis. You can't just do it once. You have to be constant. Like you said, sometimes that's binging Game of Thrones. And sometimes it's going, no, I need to dive in and read and really grow here. Or I need to go walk. You've got to be continually monitoring yourself to see how you're doing. So the key of, I love that pointing that out in self-awareness. Here's the thing. I think it's a great transition to something you run, and that's the Black City Managers Group. I think it highlights back to the story of you in Africa in that crazy season or moment of escape, you not just caring for yourself, but caring for your team. I think one of the ways you also stay healthy, and what's always helped me in being more self-aware, is thinking about the people I'm leading, think about the people I'm influencing. So for you to lead this group, to care deeply about city managers, about seeing more Black people put into positions of leadership and thriving in those positions, is that helped you stay more aware of yourself? And tell us about the Black City Managers Group. What birthed that? What is the heart behind that? Give us a little lowdown.
I had, Joe Turner and AAME, American Association of Municipal Executives. Joe and I met before Joe got out there. Because in the beginning on LinkedIn, I had a lot more followers than he, and he would tell me, "Hey, repost this, repost that." Joe saw me one day put out on LinkedIn a question: "What is ICMA for?" I love good conversation. When I tell you South Korea was one of the greatest times of my life, I have some friends in America, especially in Kentucky, when you grow up around military bases that are so patriotic. They take that like, what are you saying about Americans? Like, no, brother, I'm telling you that I was just extremely happy in that lovely country. It has nothing to do with my country. And it had that I was at a particular point in my life around some people that were very intelligent and young and curious, and I was having the best conversations and I was learning a lot. Just like I told you I did at ABC News around those young people. That was like graduate school to me. Then moving to South Korea, and I'm around these people from Australia and Africa and Asia and everywhere, and I'm learning from them. So I I I come back and I want those kind of dialogues. I want to learn in my profession. I want to hear about curiosity. And so I do go to a couple of ICMA trainings. And I know ICMA is now under the International City Managers Association is under new leadership, and I'm wishing her all the best. They brought in a new person, but I went to a conference in Nashville, which is right next door, and I go up to I believe it's Columbus, Ohio, and I'm walking around thinking, what is this? I mean, what am I doing? What am I learning here? So I put out on LinkedIn, what is ICMA for? Because I couldn't really find much on the website and all of that. It didn't seem to be addressing the things that I was addressing and needed. Um, so I put it out there. Joe saw it. And from that, we started talking, and he built AAME because we were hoping to start being an alternative to that. And for me, it was my love of cities and traveling the world and looking at cities. I would look at particularly Appalachia and inner cities. And I hate gimmicks. I hate when government wastes people's time. If you don't know how to do something or you can't do it, listen, man, if you I'm a city manager. I'm a functionary. I make things work, but there are things we don't do. If you want joy and peace, you find Jesus. If you want your potholes paved, you call me. And I mean, I've got a lane, and I'm in my lane. I know that there's what we can do, and I wanted to maximize that. What is our role? What is our role in the future? What can we do? And so, to your question of Black city managers, I'm looking at inner cities because I have been in Africa and I have been in Nigeria and I have been in these places. But more than that, I have been in Asia. I have landed in Tokyo, and you're seeing a city that is now 35 million, I believe the largest in the world, way larger than anything we have in America. You can put New York City in it 4 times and then still squeeze in Chicago. And you land in a city like that, and you don't see litter, you don't see graffiti, you don't feel like you're going to get mugged, you don't feel insight. It's possible. But I also landed in Mexico City, which is 25, 30 million people. And you're thinking, good God, how is this even manageable? It's too big, it's too vast. But you got two big cities on two different corners of the world, and one is being managed. And it was same as in South Korea. You go to these little bookshops, and they'd have all the books outside on these tables, and then they just throw this, what you and I would call a tarp over it, and put bands around it just in case it rained or something, and lock up and go home. They didn't take the books back in. They didn't worry about them getting stolen. And this is the truth. At the banks in South Korea, the tellers, the young ladies, they would wear these uniforms like on airlines. They all had these matching uniforms. And back then, they would literally walk down the streets of Seoul with these trays, and they would have their money on it, Korean money. So some of these businesses, some of these officers, they would send the young ladies, if you worked at the insurance company, take this money down the street to the bank. And they're walking in pairs with giant stacks of money, just walking through the streets, headed to the bank, where we would never do that in America. And I would look and see how stores could just leave the doors open, how people just felt safe. And I thought our approach to cities that, well, a large city is just going to have this much crime, Troy, and you're going to have this vandalism, and you're going to have this and that. And we in America have accepted that like that is as natural as rain. And it is not. We don't have to live like that. We are not enslaved by our impulses. We're not animals. We can have cities that aren't overrun. We can live peacefully. We can do, and I don't want to come across like I'm sounding naive, but we can control what we can control. So when I started Black City Managers, it was about I knew that there was only about 200 or 300 of us in this country. So I thought it's going to be a small site. It's very intentional. It's very targeted, but it ain't what some people thought it was going to be. This is not a site where we're all victims. We have to band together because we're being oppressed. No, it's like we're at the top of our games here. And we're not, if that's what you think it is, this isn't for you because I'm going to hold you accountable for how you manage your city. But in particular, I wanted to focus on inner city neighborhoods. Now, I get lost sometimes. I have to remind myself, get back to the basis of the site. Uh, but I wanted us to focus on inner cities, particularly. I don't want any more government gimmicks. I don't want any more programs. We don't have salvation in a file cabinet, just waiting to pull it out and we're going to save a whole side of town, because that's just hocus pocus. And to go into these neighborhoods, especially these neighborhood associations, and make promises, it isn't. And I get very exhausted with elected officials across the country when they make those promises, because you do see people demanding things from government. But as I told Joe on his podcast, well, they've been promised everything under the sun. Why wouldn't they demand it? When campaigns are going on, they're promised everything under the sun, so they come back later wanting it. When I go into neighborhoods, particularly an inner city neighborhood, say like in Hopkinsville, a majority Black neighborhoods on the east side of town, I went with the police chief because we were invited. The lady that runs the neighborhood association, I like her a lot. Her name is Christy. I want to have real conversations. You can ask me all the questions you want, but I'm going to ask questions of you. And I'm going to have ask. I'm going to have demands. And every city manager listening to this, you're not demanding enough of your residents. You're not demanding enough. What is your ask? So when I go into inner cities, when they say, well, your police officers were profiling our young men, and I can pull up a report. I've got all this data and I've got vests, I've got everything. So we can look into that if that's a real problem, but I'm going to turn around and ask the question, will you explain to me why your children are out on the street on a school night at 3 a.m.? What are we doing here? And you've got to work with me. And the speech I gave to the leadership class last year about pick up the Coke can, and I know some of the elected officials in the room, one of them called me a philosopher, but you had to listen to what I was saying. Who do you think put that Coca-Cola can down in your neighborhood? It isn't the people who live on the other side of the city in the richest, $2 and $3 million homes. They didn't drive across town and throw that down in your neighborhood. It's your neighbors, and it's so you've got to pick up that can. You've got to help me with taking care of your property. You got to help me in the raising of your children. You've got to meet me halfway, whatever that means to you. And some neighborhoods that's 50-50, and some neighborhoods that's 90-10. But you've got to meet me halfway, because as I'll tell you what I say when I speak in inner city neighborhoods, I cannot love your neighborhood, I cannot love your house, and I cannot love your children more than you. You've got to meet me halfway, and we can be successful. I'm not going to give you any fake promises. I'm not going to give you any gimmicks. I'm going to tell you what government can do. So I do cringe if you go back to the early part of Black city managers when they say underserved neighborhoods. So I'll ask, what does that mean? Underserved. Are you telling me from city government perspective, my garbage trucks aren't coming once a week? My police officers aren't patrolling? My fire trucks and ambulance aren't there in less than 5 minutes like we are everywhere else in the city? Because if you're telling me that, I promise you I can fix that in 2 minutes. But that isn't the case. So then what is the case? How are city governments underserving certain neighborhoods? And I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm saying be specific, because then we can fix it. But if you're saying it's just cultural, or if you're saying it's historical, we have to put that in perspective. And I will say to the Black city managers, and you'll see me say that on that page, I'm not really interested in looking back. There's there's nothing I can do about the past. There's just nothing. I'm all about looking at the present, which is what the whole premise of city government, and looking as much as we can into the future. And I will promise you that my team are going to serve every side of the city equally, but I'm going to have demands. When my police department come and tell you there's a shooting on this street, you will tell me you saw something. You will work with the police officers. So you can't say that I'm over in that neighborhood providing more police support. We're not providing more. It's that the residents in that neighborhood, when Seth came driving through, selling his drugs out of his, yellow Ford Pinto, they told me, yeah, there was a white guy in a yellow Ford Pinto and he had Tennessee tags, and they spoke up. Well, I need you to do that in your neighborhood too. It's not that we're showing favoritism. It's that they're working with me. They're meeting me halfway. And when you do that, we all win. So the purpose of Black city managers were, let's band as a group, let's hold each other accountable, let's raise the bar, not just with ourselves, but in particular in the inner city neighborhoods, but in across the city, all of it. But I want to demand more. raise the bar as high as you can demand it.
Oh, so many good things. I could talk to you for another hour. It's so encouraging. Again, I think it's just a part of your story. Your story is you are looking for opportunity and taking action wherever that is, whether that's right as a kid thinking about ABC, whether that's going to Africa, Korea, coming back here to Hopkinsville. I love it. And I think that's why you're a great follow on LinkedIn. Want to encourage people to follow you there. Obviously, we'll tag you that in the show notes. But I think that is the key. If we sit in negativity or in victimhood or in excuses, we do not
Mhm.
move things forward. That is not the solution. It will not, it just creates a cycle and a circle of more complaints, right? We need to be people of action. I love that. I want to have another conversation with you because I think you've hit on something huge here, and that's the cultures that we put up with, right? It's we can, you get to live in whatever city you want to actually live in, right? It's the way you live, it's the actions and behaviors that you live out. And if we're waiting for others to do that for us, it's not going to happen. You've got to embody that. And so I'd love to have a deeper conversation about culture, like you said, from Seoul to Mexico City to wherever you're at. I think there's some really probably some brilliant things there to dive into and to look at. But I want to be mindful of your time. What would you have? How would you close to encourage both young people who we want to encourage to look at local government as a career, as an opportunity to pour out and have a life of impact? And how would you encourage those currently serving in municipal leadership to stay the course, right? There is a lot of pressure, like you say, coming down from the national level, coming down from state level, coming just with your own residents and constituents. How would you encourage the youth of the nation, and how would you encourage current city managers?
There's a young man that's working with me now named Cody. He was working for an agency aligned with the city, and he's came because his wife's in the works for the military, so that's why they're there. And he reached out to me and said he wanted to be a city manager. I didn't even know him. I didn't even know he was in our building. I thought he was writing from Ohio or somewhere because that's what it said on his LinkedIn page. And he reached out to me, and I realized he's downstairs. He came up and wanted to talk to me. We eventually hired him because he's on a course. He loves the idea of being a city manager in Ohio. So he's our policy person. He's working developing policy, but he sits in my office. He'll come in sometimes every day. And I told him, I want you to see me on my good days and my bad days. And then you decide if you really want to do this, because it isn't all fun and games. I've lost a police officer. I've had another one shot. Um, but we've done some amazing things. I walked into that city and I drove around before my interview, and I knew that if I got that job, there were several things around that town I wanted to change. And I can tell you, for the most part, they have been changed. When I got inside the job, my primary focus has been infrastructure. And what I mean by that was just organizing the staff so everybody could work effectively, hiring certain positions, getting the software, getting the funding, getting the pay, getting the engagement, getting the communication. It was everything. I just thought the infrastructure, the basis to build a great city government, it needed to be built. And someday somebody's going to come in after me, and whoever replaces me, I will tell them I've left you a groundwork where now all you need to focus on is innovation. You can build on what we've done. But for the younger people, Cody that works for us, he is set on this is what he wants to do. So I told him, watch me in my good days and my bad, and you will have them. And there are days it is a thankless job, and there are days that it's a very gratifying job. And you've got to be able to provide that rewarding experience, no different than a doctor or a soldier. A doctor is going to lose patients. A teacher is not going to reach every student. A soldier, the things that happen. You've got to be able to find that reward for yourself. I mean, they pay you, and that's really all the taxpayers owe you. Every 2 weeks, they pay you, and that's all they owe you. They don't have to slap you on your back and thank you for your service. So you're going to have to find that gratitude yourself. And for me, it is those things that go unsaid. The new park, or how we're taking care of this, or as of right now, and I don't want to jinx it, we've had no homicides in our city. And we close out this day, this will be a whole year with no homicides. So, and the chief has been, I mean, but we doubled down. We're fully staffed in the PD. We're patrolling everywhere. We're visible. We're making a presence, and as it's not proper language, but our chief will walk around and he does his own podcast and tell you he sends a message out in the region of Hopkinsville is fuck around and find out. Don't come down here messing around with us because we'll chase you to the city limits. I've had to talk to him about that. I mean, literally, they're flying through town like the Dukes of Hazzard. I said, come, what are you doing? You're going to make me lose my liability insurance. But the message was, we're not victims here. You're not going to come run down and run us down in this town. We're going to decide how we want to live our lives here. And that's what a city manager does. You have answered that question and put it in place. It is very rewarding. It is very challenging. It's like any profession. And you're gonna have to not just look at that job for your joy and your peace. I think your podcast is saying it great, and you got to say it louder and louder. I don't know what work life balance is. Maybe it doesn't exist. So you're going to have to find that joy and that peace and that meditation somewhere else. This is just work, but it's very rewarding and no one's ever going to acknowledge you. I mean, we're doing things right now. When I get back, um, I want to bring the council and the mayor a housing strategy. When I got to the city, there was 1,000 vacant lots, some of them very small, some of them very large. We now have several programs in place that are turning that around. We the land bank is growing. We're putting lots back into the hands of residents and neighbors. The lot next door program, which I took from New Orleans. If your house is next to a vacant lot, if you take care of that lot for a year, keep it cut and clean, we will transfer the deed of it to you. And these initiatives are taking root. We got a curveball because of COVID, but they're taking root. And I see the change in that city. And I'm hoping in 5 and 10 years, those issues that I saw when I rode in won't be issues anymore. Now, no one's ever going to go, yeah, thank God that guy Troy Body came here. That's not why you do it. And it should never be. I mean, if you're going to try to live by the press release, you'll die by it. So you can't do that. You have to get your gratification in from knowing that you were there helping people and doing the right thing, as my friend Stephanie in Nashville calls it, kingdom building, and do it and know you're doing the right thing. And that's going to have to be enough for you. There's not going to be a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for you. They pay you, you know it's a good work, and then you move on.
Oh, so many good things. Troy, just amazing. I think that is the reason for the podcast, is to shine the spotlight, because you're in a job and a role and a position that doesn't get a lot of spotlight, and it's not what you're looking for, right? You are looking to be a person of impact, and again, to create that, not to get the spotlight shined on you. And so that's my job. I'm going to shine the spotlight and say thank you for the work you do. Thank you. It's so encouraging. Again, you got to follow Troy. If you're not following him on LinkedIn, be encouraged by him. And I can't wait to have you on again and chat deeper about what you're doing in Hopkinsville.
Well, thank you. I knew Darren had talked to you, and he mentioned he was telling me about you. I said, well, I know who he is and I follow him. What are you doing, Darren? You think you found some secret or something? I've listened to him. But he had told me, he said, you really should talk with him. And I really appreciate it. And I appreciate what you are doing for the profession. It seems like there's been a bit of a renaissance of the profession. I don't know if you agree with that, in the last maybe 5 years, especially coming out of COVID. Because I think city managers and local government played such an important role in keeping people safe during COVID. And it's being discussed more, I think, on LinkedIn about the role of city managers. And I'm very curious, with people like yourself and maybe myself and Joe and others in ICMA, what is the role of this profession 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And how do these young people, how do they prepare for it? I'm the last thing I want to say to him, I'm never going to tell a young person listening to your podcast that an MPA is the only way to go, and working your way up from assistant to the city manager, then assistant city manager and deputy city manager. That's a perfectly nice path. That is not the only path. I was in a war zone and now I'm at City Hall. So That was my path.
Well, and that's why we have this podcast, is to say that there is no one path to it. And it's really, I think that's the beauty of your story. It's about the experience. It's about the adventure and learning and being open, taking risk, taking action. And oh man, what a great story, Troy. Thank you for sharing your life, your leadership journey, and your insights.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for having me on this great podcast.
The stories we share here on the Halting Winter Podcast are part of something bigger, a movement to remind us where government truly lives. No, not in Washington, D.C., but right here at home, where we live, where we work, and where we play. Because it's in our cities, our counties, and our communities that the real work of democracy happens. And when local government thrives, people thrive. If this conversation inspired you, take a small step that makes a big difference. Subscribe to the podcast, share the episode, and follow along on social media. Every click helps amplify the stories that build pride, purpose, and belonging in local government. To learn more about the Halting Winter Project and how you can be part of the work that builds belonging, visit HaltingWinter.com. I'm Seth Winterhalter, and until next time, this has been the Halting Winter Podcast.